Hi everyone, and welcome to our Media and Health Symposium here at Virginia Commonwealth University. We get started in about a minute. We want to give everybody a chance to join us and get into the live feed on our symposium website. So just hang out with us for a second, and we'll get started in about a minute. Yes. And we'll get started in just a second, giving everybody the chance to join us in our live stream. Okay, hi everyone. Whether you are joining us in our live stream online or you're watching us in our audience room, we're very excited to have you with us for our second Media and Health Symposium here at Virginia Commonwealth University. My name is Marcus Messner. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Media and Health, which hosts this symposium today. And with me are Dr. Cheng, who is the Director of the Richard T. Robertson School of Media and Culture, and Dr. Bruce Rubin, who is the Chair of the Pediatrics Department here at VCU, and he's also an advisory board member and great supporter of our center, as Dr. Cheng is as well. Behind me here already, you can see our keynote speaker, Brian Ellis, Executive Vice President of PadillaCRT, and my colleague, Dr. Shana Meganck, who's going to introduce Brian to all of you in just a minute. This symposium was initially started when our center was founded 2 years ago. The center received a seed grant from the president of Virginia Commonwealth University, Michael Rao, through the Quest Innovation Fund. So this is the second time we are able to host this symposium. This time we've decided to offer this symposium virtually through Google Hangout, where you are joining us right now. We had some great experiences with Google Hangout in an open online course that we taught last fall, in the fall semester. And so this is the first time we're using Google Hangout for a symposium or conference. So we hope everything goes well, but if there are some, hopefully only minor technical issues, please bear with us. The Center for Media and Health was started by my predecessor, Dr. Yan Jin, who's probably joining us in this live feed right now. She'll be actually a presenter and a discussant later today in the symposium. Today, you will hear from professionals and researchers alike. We here in the Center for Media and Health and at the Robertson School value research and the professional outlook the same. And all of our speakers are going to address the important issue in health communication that we feel really needs more attention, which is mobile and social media in health communication. So you will hear from leading experts like Brian Ellis and as professionals who are actually fighting the Ebola crisis in West Africa right now. We will have a panel on that. You will listen to 14 research presentations, and these research topics were selected through a peer review process late last year. Please take a look at our symposium website to see the full program for today, and you can follow live coverage, of course, on our website, but also on our Twitter account, which is VCU-CMH, and you can interact with us as well by posting questions, discussions on Twitter, and we're using the hashtag VCUGlobalHealth. Before I let Dr. Cheng and Dr. Rubin speak a few welcoming words as well, please also let me thank VCU's All Lab very much for letting us host this symposium in their facilities. We are in the innovative classroom here right now. We are speakers, and then our audience, our in-person audience, is located in the conference of the OLPAD, which has been started this last summer to innovate education here at VCU. So we're very grateful to the OLPAD's director, Dr. Jonathan Becker, and his team, who have been really great supporters, not only of the symposium, but of our center. With that said, please let me turn it over to Dr. Cheng and Dr. Rubin. Maybe Hong, you can start and say a few welcoming words to our online audience.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Messner. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the second Media and Health Symposium at the Virginia Commonwealth University. The Richard T. Robertson School of Media and Culture is very proud to be a major player in this symposium. The Center for Media and Health at VCU, as Dr. Messner mentioned just now, organizes this symposium. So the center was born in our school. A number of faculty and graduate students in the Robertson School are deeply involved in this symposium under the excellent leadership of Dr. Messner. 15 years ago, the United Nations set out 8 Millennium Development Goals. 4 of those goals are clearly focused on public health. With 189 UN member nations at that time, and 193 now committed to helping achieve these goals, improving public health has never become so important, intensive, and time-bound in a global sense. As a communication channels and platforms, media, as we all know, play pivotal roles in creating and disseminating media and health-related messages, especially in this mobile and social media age. Interdisciplinary collaboration between the fields of media and health, as Dr. Messner mentioned just now, is a perfect way to enhance health communication research and practice. The Center for Media and Health at the VCU is a collaborative hub for health communication researchers, scientists, and professionals. This symposium is an excellent example and impressive outcome of such innovative interdisciplinary collaboration. Indeed, this symposium is perfectly aligned with the Robertson School's priorities. It significantly strengthens the research agenda of the school in multiple ways, I think. First, the symposium best gathers the expertise in the Robertson School in advertising, journalism, and public relations of both research and professional faculty. Meanwhile, this symposium is focused on a number of interesting and important topics on mobile and social media, which is current edge and timely in both health communication research and practice. Equally important, this symposium is significantly developing the ties the Center for Media and Health and the Robertson School have with scholars and practitioners in other academic units in the Richmond area and in many parts of this country and in the world. I know by now you cannot wait for the symposium to be fully unfolding. I'm sure you are enjoying the keynote speech and all the sessions today. I wish the symposium a tremendous success. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Professor Hong. This is the secretary I've been invited to welcome you to this symposium, so I must have gotten it right last year. Hopefully, it will continue. And Professor Yan Jin approached me a couple of years ago with the idea for this Center for Media and Health. It was clear that the need was great and that the timing was absolutely perfect. And both the center and the symposia have has since exceeded all expectations. It's been delightful to be part of it. It's cliche to say that we live in an information age, and no question that the rapid exchange of massive amounts of information has accelerated the pace of medical discoveries. The dark side of the force, however, is we also live in an age of misinformation, and the tremendous amount of information available on the internet, I believe, is probably dwarfed by the amount of misinformation that has an adverse effect or the potential to harm many people and many of our patients. I had the sad news this week that an infant that I cared for at the Children's Hospital of Richmond last month in our ICU, an infant that received tremendous heroic measures of mechanical ventilation, renal dialysis, cardiopulmonary bypass, finally succumbed to whooping cough, a really preventable disease. Media and health are hand in hand and are inseparable today. Social media, the focus of today's symposium, will be critical in empowering patients to not only be partners, full partners in their care, but to take control and command of their care. Only by effectively studying ways to better communicate, to project and understand the future of mass communication, and to bring together scientists, educators, investigators, health professionals, and patient advocates, can we really see the greatest value for a Center of Media and Health like we have here at GCU. Thank you for letting me be part of this.
Thank you so much, and for all your support for the center, not only now, but also over the last 3 years, and hopefully also in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, now it's time to open the camera and the microphone for our keynote speaker, Brian. Shana Meganck will introduce our speaker and his topic this morning. Shana?
Thank you, Marcus. We are so fortunate to have my former colleague, Brian Ellis, here with us today to give the keynote address. Brian is an executive vice president at PadillaCRT, where he serves as the strategic leader of their crisis management practice. As a former journalist, he has offered a unique perspective on how the media operates during a crisis to such clients as Northern Virginia Hospital Alliance, Centera Health System, HCA, Abbott Laboratories, and Girl Scouts, among others. Brian's discussion today will focus on healthcare issues management in a social world. But before Brian gets started, I'm going to let my colleague Scott Sherman in the audience room discuss how the audience room and the Twitter discussion will work today.
Hello. Welcome to the symposium. And quick jump in before the keynote speaker. We have many speakers lined up for today, and the schedule is on our website and on this program. And we have a lot of people on the Google Hangout there. Thank you very much. And there's a lot of people in this room. We have two rooms at VCU. One is the one with Brian Ellis, our keynote speaker, and other speakers will be speaking from there. And then we have this room where we have mics on the table so you guys can ask questions when we open up the floor. And we are going to be surfing Twitter with the hashtag VCU Global Health. So anywhere, the people in the room or the people on Google Hangout can shoot us questions there, ask questions and comment. And let's see what else we have going on. I think that's about it. Please join in the conversation. That's what it's all about. So no further ado, let's go back to Brian Ellis with the keynote address.
Thanks, guys. I really do appreciate it. I can't tell you how excited I really am about the opportunity to kind of share this information using this technology. It's really interesting to me. This is my first Google Plus experience, and I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to kind of use the technology, kind of share the technology, and also to help us better understand how the technology ultimately influences issues management. What I'm going to do today is kind of look at a case study in particular, but then I really want to start looking at trends that we start While he's fixing that, let me go ahead and kind of look at that Ebola case and kind of keep the discussion going. So what we had here was a situation where you had a dynamic disease state going on in West Africa. There was a lot of media coverage regarding what was going on in Ebola, so it wasn't as if the issue was a secret. There was a lot of Twitter discussion, a lot of online discussion, but the reality is all of this was taking place regarding a case in a totally different region of the world. And what you discover in looking at this is obviously you have the September case, and everybody knows what's happening. Let's be honest with ourselves. There's an 8-month window here to get very, very smart. And one of the trends that we started recognizing early in the process is that healthcare workers were going to be a threat. They were going to be in danger, obviously, as a result of what was going on from the Ebola situation. So the WHO was aware of this, CDC was aware of this, and in all honesty, local hospitals and facilities here in the United States should have been aware of this, because the reality is we live in a global society. And there was clearly going to be travel, and clearly there were going to be people that were going to come from West Africa to a wide variety of regions across the country. Yet that threat ultimately was not recognized here in the United States. So let's now jump to the U.S. case. Now keep in mind this is September 28th, when a gentleman walked into a hospital in West Texas and diagnosed with Ebola. This was not the first patient in the United States. The first patient in the United States was actually a month earlier. But in this case, a patient is exposed to Ebola, and the next thing you know, we have 2 healthcare workers who have also been exposed and are also diagnosed actually with Ebola.
We're having an issue with the PowerPoint. Give me just one quick second. Okay. Sorry about that.
Sorry.
This is good again.
Actually, I had the computer crash. Hey, just give us a quick second. Hi, this is Marcus Messner again. I'm trying to fix the PowerPoint here right quick for Brian, so just give us one quick second.
While Marcus is doing that, I want to stress, if you have questions during any portion of this presentation, feel free to speak up, or you can use the hashtag VCU Global Health to help kind of drive this conversation, because I really do want this to be a conversation in terms of what we're seeing out there in the marketplace.
Okay. I'm going to leave it like this. So
okay.
It should be fine now if you want to.
Okay. So if I go, I'll have to go.
Hold on 1 second.
Oh, okay. Just need a little bit bigger.
Yep.
So I can see. Or the keyboard. Actually, is the keyboard wireless?
Yeah.
Let me get the keyboard.
Okay, good. But the issue is, hold on.
Keyboard's easier for me than a mouse. There we go. Yeah, they are able to hold on 1 second. I guess we're seeing it. That's what we're seeing.
Yes. There you go. So now we should be good.
Okay.
You can just move it forward.
We're seeing it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So here we are. We've got our case, September 28, 2014. The first case walks into the hospital in West Texas, and within 11 days, we actually have 2 nurses who have contracted Ebola. Now, again, this was an issue that was identified early on in the entire Ebola outbreak. And here in the United States, one of the most sophisticated healthcare systems in the world, we have the same fundamental problem. And ultimately, you can see what's about to happen in terms of what's going to take place. You see an explosion of actually online traffic from a digital perspective. The number of Twitter comments jumps from 100 to 6,000. And here's the important thing to recognize. It's easy when you're sitting in a room with two people to kind of explain what's going on. But when that number jumps dramatically and the information that they're sharing is not accurate, what happens is you get an explosion of misinformation. And it's the digital space that is making that happen so fast. And having worked in issues management for many years, I can tell you this. Once the bad information gets out, it's very, very difficult to correct, particularly in today's media landscape, because what's happening is media outlets are taking information that they receive from other news sources and sharing that information. They're not checking, they're not calling, they're not verifying this information because the need for speed is so fast. And that's ultimately what you're seeing here, and bad information gets out. And when bad information gets out, you start to see headlines like this, where this was the situation where the nurse traveled to Cleveland, a big scare that went on in Cleveland around where did she go, what did she do, and everything else ultimately drove this kind of activity. And I'm here to tell you, it wasn't the only place. I recall speaking to many healthcare institutions across the country who were telling me they were scrambling with what to do, how to communicate, what to share. And what puzzled me is I remember over 10 years ago working a variety of healthcare plans on pandemic situations around the bird flus. And it amazed me that these health institutions had not taken that information and started to really pull that plan out to be able to respond in a very rapid way. And obviously, all of this helped feed that kind of situation. We had an infected internet users out there who were sharing information. And the Twitter situation is a dynamic where people are actually trying to create misinformation. And that's the reality of today's world. And the need for speed has never been greater. Now, I want you to recognize what happens when an issue is managed poorly. When an issue is not communicated effectively, there are financial consequences and financial impacts. Many of you may remember the Target data breach situation and the problems that it created. Recognize that the CEO and the Chief Information Officer are no longer in that location. You see it time and time and time again. People who are in the position of being able to manage the situation, if they can't effectively communicate in the midst of the crisis, ultimately you reach the blame phase, and many times those individuals are not around. So this is a significant issue for this hospital. Not only did they lose revenue in their emergency room, they lost trust in their emergency room. Obviously, ongoing traffic to that emergency room is going to be impacted. Their brand took a major hit, and ultimately they did not come across as a healthcare organization that was prepared to manage this kind of situation. So you can see the consequences, and ultimately from a media perspective, what helped feed that situation. And ultimately the media started picking up on the impact of social media and issues management. But one thing I want to emphasize, I've talked a lot about the dangers and the challenges of social media and the digital channels, but I also want you to recognize the other side of that. There are great opportunities to use these social channels to help manage the flow of information, to stay connected with what people are talking about, so that you can actually use those channels to better effectively communicate with those target audiences. Because right now I'm dealing with a client where we made the decision not to participate in certain aspects from the media perspective, instead using the social channels to go directly to the consumer to tell a more compelling and more complete story. So the social channels can also be a very effective tool in helping you better communicate your story in a situation. Now, clearly there are people out there trying to do the right thing. The CDC actually talks about how this situation really forced them to step up their game in the social media platform as a result of the misinformation. And what's important here to recognize is the kinds of tools you need to create in the digital space to be really effective. So here you have an infographic talking about what's going on with Ebola, but here's the problem. The CDC is not viewed by the general consumer as the driver of that information. In other words, people weren't used to going to the CDC website to pull this information. And the CDC didn't have the digital muscle to activate health systems across the country to to share this information in a comprehensive manner in a fast method way so that they could share this information rapidly. I actually spent time in hospitals around this time period, and I can tell you as a patient, I was there from a patient perspective, I never saw this. I never even had a clue that this existed. So recognize the opportunity to put information out there, but you have to make sure you have the ability before the issue happens to be able to activate a much larger audience and advocates that might be able to help you control the situation in terms of where you're going. So let's review what happened here. Clearly a failure to recognize the threat and a failure to mobilize what was going on. If the leading nations of this continent had gotten together early in the process, we actually could have stopped this in West Africa. As I said, I had a client in West Africa at this time, and they were searching for information, searching for news, begging for help, and they weren't getting a whole lot of that help. There was clearly a failure to develop a comprehensive communication plan, not only in terms of educating consumers on this side of the pond, but also making sure that health systems were prepared to effectively communicate what was going on. And ultimately, that ties down to a failure of leadership from an overall perspective. So let me pause for a second. I know I've been going pretty quick. Anybody have any questions that they want to jump in with right now? Okay, I want to move on. So what does the social timeline look like? And what happens in the digital space to make sure we understand how it works? And the real message here is speed and time, okay? So let's imagine crisis happens. Within the first hour, you're in the what happened phase, where the initial reports, the initial social discussion is really talking about the details of the situation and what may be unfolding. What's critical here is to make sure the information is accurate. In other words, you have 1 hour to get your story out to help control the dynamic of the conversation, to frame this discussion in terms of what's going on. Because after that first hour, you enter what we call the sharing phase. So this might be an example where Shana takes the information that she has in that first hour and starts sharing it with friends. And then those friends share Shana's stuff, and then those friends share it again. And you can start to see where the numbers come into play. You have an explosion of reach that happens very, very rapidly. And if that first piece of information is not accurate, then what you have is a sea of misinformation, what we call the misinformation wave, that is almost impossible to stop. And this is what happened in the Ebola case. There was a lot of misinformation going on out there. There was a lot of fear. The consumer didn't fully understand what it meant, and that's what fed all of this information and fear that the consumer had. They lacked the information that they needed. It was not delivered to them in a fashion that they could consume it and remember it. So they were fearful, and we had, obviously, media stoking the flames. Keep in mind, that's how the media sells newspapers. That's the reason you watch nightly newscasts, because that's what you will buy. And ultimately, that's what happens. And then the process just repeats, and over and over and over again. So you can see the speed at which this works. In the old days, when I first started doing issues management, we had like 2 days before we got to this phase. And now we're talking about it in hours. So what does that mean to you from a communications perspective in a healthcare environment? What it means is this. You better know what your threats are before they happen. In reality, you can already figure those out. You need to understand what those threats are, and you better have materials, communication, all the details you're going to need ready to communicate just like that. You have 1 hour to get it ready. And I can tell you, trying to get it blessed and approved in the process, trying to get it through the lawyers in this process is not an easy task. So having it done ahead of time is absolutely critical. So let's look at why this is important and understand the dynamics that are happening from a consumer perspective in terms of where they're getting their news. Now, I'm proud to still see television as the #1 source for news for consumers, being a former broadcast journalist, but I'm here to tell you that's not going to last very long. More and more people are getting their news from digital tools. We talked earlier, Marcus was mentioning the use of the phone and where it's really going from a phone perspective and where today's consumers are, and more importantly, where the millennials are. Millennials don't read newspapers. I have several of them in my office right now, and trying to get them to read the newspapers, it's like getting them to take out the trash. It's just not going to happen. So recognize where the consumer's going and where they're getting their information, and understand that if you're not there now, you better start getting there pretty quick, because that's where the consumer is going to get their information. And we talk about the mobile tools that you have. And you need to start to recognize the difference between those mobile tools and how to use those mobile tools to effectively communicate. In other words, there's differences of usage patterns based on the platform. A person that's on their phone doesn't use it the same way they use it on their iPad. They don't pull the same information from their computer screen that they actually pull from their mobile device. You need to understand the difference between those so that you can create the proper digital tools necessary to effectively communicate. In other words, can I use my social platform, my mobile platform to feed information to someone like Shana to tease her to go to a different platform to get the information that they want? Can I use social media to communicate with them on their mobile device and drive them to another location where I can share a more complete story? That's how you have to start thinking about crisis management in a digital world. The other thing you need to recognize is that right now, in the room where you guys are sitting and online where you all are, each of you is a citizen journalist. If you watch today's media coverage of any major incident, typically one of the first images that you will see of the situation will actually be a photograph taken by a citizen journalist. And more people are becoming very comfortable with sharing that information and sharing it in a fashion that makes it very dramatic when the details aren't necessarily there. So you need to recognize that inside the hospital over at VCU, you probably have 300 journalists just waiting for the opportunity to claim their 15 seconds of fame. And it will happen. Even your most trusted employees will take their cameras out, snap a picture, send it to a friend like Shana, who in turn sends it to 500 other friends, who in turn share it with the media, and next thing you know, that's where it's showing up online. I had a client just the other day telling me he did an interview with a reporter. The reporter actually went to his Facebook page to grab the image and use that image from his Facebook page as part of their story. So recognize that's how the media is operating today, and using these social channels ultimately drive coverage. But most of us kind of think of social and we instantly go to Twitter and Facebook. And you need to recognize that there are other social channels out there and that are being used in different dynamic ways. Some of you may be familiar with Read It. They became famous during the Boston Massacre, the bombing that happened up at the Boston Marathon, where they were sharing information that was inaccurate. They were accusing people actually of participating when in fact that didn't happen. And ultimately they sent police on a goose chase in many respects trying to manage this situation. So you need to recognize these different channels. It's important to note that Twitter and Facebook, actually Facebook is the most far-reaching at this point in time. Twitter is a very distant second. The dynamics of where people are going in these different platforms is very, very interesting to find out different target audiences and who you want to talk to. Obviously, the most growth in Facebook is happening in a much older generation. Many younger generations are leaving it. So these are the dynamics that you need to understand, and I'll really credit the Pew Institute for keeping us up to date on what's going on here. They do fabulous work in really tracking what's happening from a media perspective. I strongly encourage you to visit those sites to stay up to date, because it really does change dramatically in terms of what's going on. So what have we learned in this whole process? One, remember, crises start small. Almost every crisis I've been involved in, it dates back a long time. The key is trying to recognize when that's going to happen and recognize that effective communication ultimately drives everything that you do. Whether you're trying to manage the issue and effectively communicate just inside your organization or trying to communicate externally, you need to recognize that's what it does. And social media will drive the external conversation. Now, whenever an issue happens with a client of ours, the very first thing we do is we turn on our social media monitoring. We start watching what people are saying. It's a great tool to use to measure whether your messaging is actually being used by others. And if it's not being used, you can learn to shape and change your messaging, ultimately to be effective in reaching the target audience. Digital channels will enable you to tell a more compelling story, a more complete story. Again, you have the opportunity to use these platforms to tell your story in a much richer, much more powerful way without having to go through the media to do that anymore. So we strongly encourage you to use these digital channels, but it's important that you know how to use them. You have to be engaged in them. You have to use them very, very aggressively in terms of what you're doing. But lastly, all of this hinges on one simple concept. You have to have a plan. You have to know what you're doing. You have to know before it actually happens. Too many organizations we deal with are doing this on the fly. And I can tell you that's not the way to manage an issue, either in this environment or even in the previous environment. Your plan is going to be your savior. Make sure you have your plan in place. So what does this mean? What it really means is that you need to demonstrate through your plan, through all the activities and the communication, that you have the situation under control. Because if you don't, the speed by which they will demonstrate you're out of control will happen very fast. And it will take place very, very rapidly. So you really need to make sure you're reviewing your primary threats and that you have confidence inside your organization to manage the situation. I want you to think what it was like inside that hospital in West Texas when this patient came in and they found out that there were 2 nurses that actually contracted Ebola. Do you remember the headlines that you saw? Do you remember what the nursing associations did and the panic that was created within the medical community about how to manage and the preparation for managing these kinds of situations? And a lot of that was fed as a result of some of the social media activities. You need to build an issues management mindset. You know, unfortunately, I can't say unfortunately, but the reality is many of the senior leaders within most organizations are not real comfortable in this space. They don't trust it in many respects, and as a result, they're unwilling in some cases to go there. So it's really, really important for those that are you in the communications field to be working with your senior leadership to get them comfortable in this space and for them to recognize the power of these digital tools and how they can effectively be used to help you manage the situation. And you need to learn to master it. It happens so fast that if you can't understand the technology to make things happen, I mean, we experienced a little bit of a technology gap here today. Fortunately, Marcus knew how to fix it real quick, and we're back online. In an issue, you sometimes don't get that grace. People aren't going to wait for you to get it right. They really need to make sure that you have that information. So these are the learnings, I think, that we have from looking at digital and where digital is going and how you're going to manage the situation. So with that, I want to open it up to any questions that folks may have.
Yeah,
and again, the hashtag is VCU Global Health.
Yeah, so thank you, Brian, and I'm going to just check with Scott and see if there's any questions from the audience room or Twitter.
Are there any questions in the room?
Sure, I have a question. Scott, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Brian, so much for coming here today. I totally agree with you in terms of the whole importance of planning, and really getting things in place, you know, before a crisis like Ebola or whatever, any type of health crisis comes for a health organization. My question is, you know, you mentioned that Reddit kind of emerged as a platform where people get their news information, and with that said, with so many digital platforms constantly changing and evolving, you know, so quickly, and, you know, trying to get senior leadership on board, how can we as communicators kind of keep up with that, and what strategies would you give for health communicators who, you know, may not know that Reddit emerged as a platform where this information, where misinformation is kind of being spread around to the general public?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to stay up to speed on all the different platforms I think you have to use out there. What we have found to be the secret is actually monitoring in the social channels and to kind of keep track of what's happening even during an issue. In other words, typically during an issue, the hashtags are really what we'll start looking for and start tracking individuals and where they're coming from and what they're doing. And typically you'll see a signature that will tell you, I need to go check this out. I need to go watch this. The reality is the tools that you have pretty much can be used across all of those channels. So it really doesn't matter what channel it is. What really matters is that you have the tools you need to effectively communicate in that channel and to get set up and ready to rock and roll. So some of it you'll have to do on the fly. There's just no doubt about it. But that's crisis management. You're always doing things on the fly. But identifying some of those ahead of time and understanding where they are, that's really important. Now, the other thing I'll point out is this. You know, in the old days, we knew that if we could get the right story to the Associated Press, to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, and the big networks, that we could hit the far larger audience with the messages that we needed to hit. And there'll be some outliers out there that'll carry some bad information, and we can manage that situation. Well, the same thing is true in the digital space. The reality is Facebook is still the dominant player. Okay, LinkedIn is growing dramatically. You need to really pay attention to LinkedIn. And if you learn to play in those spaces, learn to dominate the major conversations, the rest of these little side-off conversations become much easier to manage because you get, again, a groundswell of misinformation is the exact same thing as a groundswell of good information. Okay? They both can be effective. It's learning how to use those channels and know when to use those channels to make it happen. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. That's good for our students to hear because I think they get overwhelmed with a lot of the technologies that have come about over the past couple of years. So, thank you.
And unfortunately, the technology that we're comfortable with today is going to be different than tomorrow. I would tell them to pay very close attention to mobile. Mobile's where it's going. There's no doubt about that. So if I really had to focus on something, mobile would be the space that I want to make sure I was very, very comfortable.
Brian, Brian, we have a question from Twitter. What are some strategies to get senior leadership on board with social media?
Great question. You know, I wish there was a secret pill, a secret bullet. To be honest with you, I found fear is the greatest motivator in helping them see what's going on. One of the things that we're starting to work with, particularly with senior leadership, is we do regular drills with clients. So we'll do tabletop drills. So we'll sit at a table like this, 6 or 7 of us around the table, and we'll throw out the scenario where we'll work that kind of exercise. We're starting now to bring social media into that dynamic. So we have a social media simulator that we have, and we actually let them see and experience what happens in the social space, and basically that builds the fear. And now they understand, and they understand why they need to get engaged and involved in that situation. I think the data sets are very compelling, and they're really, and it's the experience that they have that really helps shape what you're going for. So, I would encourage case studies, very simple executive level case studies, so that they can get in and understand what's going on. But I've always found fear to be the biggest driver and to change behavior the best. Do your tabletop exercises. Expose them to the social media sphere in terms of what it might be like, and let them see it so that they understand why it's important that they effectively communicate in that space.
Can you just answer a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, I'm Dr. Keel. Hi, Shana. Real quick question regarding qualities to look for in someone that you're going to trust with this information. I'm from a small pediatrics group, so just kind of looking for what are the qualities I should look for in someone that might run my Twitter, my Facebook page, etc., LinkedIn.
You mean hiring someone to run that for you?
Hopefully, someone from within. The small budget.
Who on the team can do this?
Exactly.
Watch them. Okay? It's the person who's always constantly on their phone. They're really fast at texting. That's the first signal to me, is watch them. Typically, to be honest with you, they're a whole lot younger than me. They're in their 20s, 25. They're really comfortable in this space. They understand how it works, and they understand how to communicate in these channels, and then get them trained. Help them understand the different kinds of messaging that they need to provide, the different kinds of things that you're really trying to achieve, and have a real strategy. I have found in working with many of the young folks in our offices around this, if you lay out a strategy for them in terms of what you're really trying to do, they can bring phenomenal ideas and phenomenal thoughts to that dialogue and that conversation, and really teach us old guys how to do things in a new digital space. So we tend to look for a much younger group, give them a little leeway, a little freedom to kind of take this, and I'm here to tell you they're going to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes in the social world, so it's, I don't want to say it's accepted, but you're given a little more grace, so to speak. So those would be the kinds of folks that I'd be looking for inside my organization. You want to make sure that they're very comfortable in the different platforms and that they're used to playing in them. So I want somebody who's got a Facebook page. I want someone who's on Twitter. I want someone who understands some of the other platforms that are out there, has experienced them, for instance. They may visit YouTube on a regular basis, Instagram, read it. Again, there are a variety of ones out there that you can really go to. But Twitter and Facebook, I want to make sure they're really strong.
Other question? Anyone? Well, we have another one from Twitter. which asks, which ethical legal issues do you encounter with your clients as they engage on social media?
Which ethical issues do we encounter when dealing on social media? The biggest one is transparency, and making sure that we're being transparent with who's communicating for who. We run into this all the time, not necessarily on the issue side, but more on the marketing promotional side, where we may tap into third parties to speak on behalf of a client and they don't identify themselves many times the way that they should from a transparency perspective. So transparency is perhaps the biggest issue I think we see from an ethical perspective. I know some people really get caught up on who's actually doing the work, who's typing in the Twitter and all those kinds of things. And I guess you can easily argue that and understand that. I think most people have come to understand that the President of the United States is not the one actually doing the Twitter feed for him. There are other people that are doing that right now for him. What matters is that the message that he is sending is his thinking and happening from that perspective. So those to me are probably the two biggest areas that I see that we run into with clients in terms of dealing with Facebook and social media platforms.
Brian, maybe I can follow up from the back here with you on that. Do you see any special legal challenges in the health field with patient information, HIPAA regulation?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you address that with your clients?
Yeah, it's a real issue. I was in Roanoke yesterday working with a hospital, and we had a lot of conversations about HIPAA and the requirements and the patient regulations and all of those kinds of situations. And recognizing it, the problem that you have is the consumer doesn't understand HIPAA. They don't get it. They don't understand why you can and can't share information. And I think you're basically breaking new ground here. And there's going to be a lot of trial and error that's going to take place. And you're going to have some mistakes that are going to take place. I think it really comes back to the culture of the health system and the operation that they have around HIPAA and the guidelines around HIPAA. There are ways to work around HIPAA and really get around that, but it's really a cultural issue within the health institution in terms of how they're going to manage those kinds of situations and making sure that everyone knows what those rules are and how that's going to work. The institution I was speaking with yesterday, they're doing a lot of brand journalism in their social platforms. And they are, they're really, really diligent on the HIPAA front to the point of every inch of a screen that they show from a broadcast is reviewed and checked before it goes anywhere. And it's just a lot more work that's being created. But as a result, they're getting smarter in their production process as to what they can include and what they can't include. And they're changing their thinking, but they're learning this on the fly. They're having to learn this process as they're going. And it's been challenging. They've made some mistakes. They've acknowledged it. But the key is they're not afraid. They're not afraid to keep trying. They're not afraid to keep pushing that envelope a little bit to try and find that balance between protecting privacy from a HIPAA perspective and at the same time educating the consumer to make sure people are educated about whatever the situation may be. So it's a growing dynamic challenge in the marketplace, particularly on the issues side in terms of what you can and cannot share. That does create some challenges, but part of that is also about educating the consumer so that they in turn can understand why certain pieces of information can't be shared.
Scott, do you have any other questions? I have one if you don't.
I guess that's no.
I guess that's no. Let's see if I can read my chicken scratch. So you mentioned how quickly rumors spread in the social world, obviously. Do you have any recommendations for companies on messages that they should get out immediately in a crisis situation?
Yeah, absolutely. I have dealt with, I can't fathom another different kind of crises that I haven't dealt with. Murders, shootings, health issues, hurricanes, tornadoes, natural disasters, all of those. And I have come to recognize one thing. In the first 12 hours of every crisis, there's 3 fundamental messages that can be approved now, legal can bless them, and you should be ready to go as soon as it happens. Message number 1 is you got to show compassion. You got to demonstrate compassion because typically in a crisis scenario, someone's been hurt. So there's no reason you can't communicate compassion right away and make that happen. 2 is your plan. People want to know that you have the situation under control. And the way you demonstrate control is by communicating what you're actually doing to manage the situation. So you talk about your plan. And I mean in detail. The more detail you can provide, the more comfort I will have in your ability to manage the situation. There is nothing secret in your plan. I've read hundreds of them. I have yet to find anything in any of them that is a proprietary secret. So don't be afraid to share your plan. And lastly, the investigation. There's a lot of information you're not going to know, and that's the information bucket. So if you don't know, don't speculate, don't guess. Let people know it's under investigation. The key around the investigation is process. What's the process for the investigation? Because that is a matter of trust. Do I trust you to investigate what happened and to share that information with me? And there's no reason you can't talk about the process either. It's not secret. They're pretty much all the same. So all of these messages should be ready to go based on your primary threats. So walk in a hospital. Let's just say natural disaster. Remember the tornadoes that hit in the Midwest and basically wiped out a hospital? Envision this is your health institution. Are your messages blessed already? Do you already have your Twitter posts ready to go? Because you know what the risk is. Tornado comes, hits the hospital, you know what you're going to say. That stuff should already be ready. It should already be queued. We're actually having clients now build what we call dark sites. These are web platforms that are hidden on their web pages, but if the issue ever comes live, they can turn it on just like that, and all the messaging is already there and ready to go. So we can instantly get in the social channels and start driving people to these digital platforms to get the most accurate information, and we become the news source versus all the other people. So that's really what we're trying to do, and trying to manage these issues in a digital world.
Brian, another question I have. You, of course, work for a lot of big clients that can afford to hire a communications agency. What kind of tip would you have for, a family practice, that maybe one or two doctors, they have a small staff, and, they see the potential of social media? How should they start their engagement? And then what should they expect? How much of an impact can they actually have if they're not hiring a company, but they are trying to do it by themselves? Does that make a lot of sense for them to do? Should they stay away? What's your take on that?
So the question is, how does a small practice really kind of manage the situation? And here would be the simple steps I tell you. First and foremost, identify the threats for your practice. And you don't need 10. Keep it 2 or 3, because most small practices don't have that many issues. It's typically the number one threat that you're going to have and what you're going to face. Figure out what you're going to say from day one, okay? You should know that already. So figure out how you're going to communicate and what you're going to do, and then start finding some talent. And sometimes the talent's a daughter, a son, family member, friends. Don't be afraid to lean on your friends and identify friends in some respects who might be able to help you out and activate in these kinds of situations. And the other thing is don't be afraid to bring in someone from the outside. I encourage that to every single client, big or small. I mean, I deal with a lot of very small clients here in the city of Richmond, a lot of nonprofits that need help. Many times I'll come in and I'll counsel them on what to do and tell them where to go and how to manage things based on their dynamic and make things happen pretty quickly. So a lot of issues can be managed very, very inexpensively in terms of managing these kinds of situations. But it's most important that you're ready for it, that you know what you're going to do when that situation takes place. And real important here, don't delay. I've had situations where a client, the issue happened and they sit on it. They don't take any action. They're kind of waiting for more development and everything else. And that delay process, they're not getting ready. You have to get ready the moment you hear about it, because you never know when it may go public. And if you're not ready when it does go public, then you're going to be chasing your tail. It's very, very difficult. So identify your threats, identify some potential resources that you might be able to tap into, family, friends, whatever you may do, and bring in someone from the outside early to help you manage that process and get you ready. It may just be an hour or 2 of their time, and we can really help them make a big difference in how they might manage a situation. Does that help?
Scott, do you have any other questions for us?
I think we're good here. Great job, Brian.
Well, thank you guys very much. I really do appreciate the opportunity. I love the platform. It's really nice, really neat. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Brian, for being here. And next up will be our first research panel on uses and effects of mobile and social media and health communications, moderated by Marcus. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We will be back in just a few minutes, and you can find the new link on our Symposium website.